Claire had appraised hundreds of estates. She knew what to look for: water damage, forged signatures, missing inventory. What she hadn't expected was a secret drawer in an 18th century bureau, and inside it, architectural drawings that should not have existed. By the time she understood what she had found, someone was already watching. The car engine died with a tired click, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the long drive itself. Claire Sterling sat still for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the wrought iron gates ahead. Ashwood Estate. The name had sounded almost romantic in the email. In reality, it looked like something that had been forgotten on purpose. The gates were half open, one side leaning inward as if it had given up resisting time. Beyond them, the long gravel path disappeared into a stretch of overgrown trees that pressed too close together, swallowing light instead of letting it through. Claire exhaled slowly, reached for her folder, and stepped out. She glanced at her phone. The signal was weak, shadowed by the dense trees. Before moving toward the gate, she reached into her pocket and toggled a small, portable signal booster, watching the bars on the screen stabilize. Accuracy required connectivity. The air smelled of damp wood and old leaves. No movement, no sound, just the faint creak of metal as the gate shifted behind her when she pushed it wider and walked through. Each step on the gravel echoed more than it should have, as if the place itself was listening. By the time the house came into full view, Claire had already made her first conclusion. Whatever remained inside, it hadn't been properly cared for in years. The estate stood tall, but not proud. Its stone darkened, windows clouded, parts of the roof sagging just enough to signal neglect without full collapse. It was a monument to a family that had run out of resources, but not out of secrets. She approached the front door, raised her hand, and knocked. The sound was dull, absorbed by thick wood. No response. She knocked again, sharper this time. A pause. Then, from somewhere deeper inside, the faint scrape of movement. Lock shifted. The door opened just enough to reveal a man standing in the narrow gap. He didn't look like the owner. Too young, too tired in a different way. His shirt sleeves were rolled, smudged with dust and varnish. His eyes moved quickly, assessing, cautious. "You're early," he said. Claire tilted her head slightly. "I'm on time." A brief pause. Then the door opened wider. "Right?" he muttered, stepping aside. "Claire, I assume." She nodded as she stepped in, immediately noticing the difference between outside neglect and interior effort. The entrance hall was worn, yes, but not abandoned. Furniture had been pushed aside in careful order. Dust covered most surfaces, except for narrow paths where someone clearly worked. "Oliver," he said, closing the door behind her. "I was told you'd be coming to evaluate what's left." "That's correct." Claire's voice remained even as her gaze moved across the room, cataloging silently. "I'll need access to all rooms, documents if available, and any storage areas that haven't been listed." Oliver let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Storage areas not listed? That's most of the house." Claire turned to him. "Then we'll start systematically." He nodded, though something in his expression shifted, something between resignation and reluctant respect. "This way." He led her through a corridor where the wallpaper peeled in thin, curling strips. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. The house was being held together by effort, not resources. They passed rooms filled with covered furniture, crates, and scattered tools. Finally, they reached a space that felt different. A workshop, tables lined with instruments, brushes, clamps. Pieces of furniture in various stages of restoration stood like paused stories. This was where the dust thinned, where the air smelled of oil and wood polish instead of decay. Claire stepped closer to a half-restored cabinet, running her fingers just above the surface without touching. "You're restoring these?" Oliver leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed. His hand drifted unconsciously to the pocket of his work apron, fingers brushing against a small, rectangular shape hidden beneath the fabric. It was a habit of tension, one he quickly suppressed when Claire's gaze moved toward him. "Trying to. With what funding?" He gave a small shrug. "Food and a roof." Claire looked at him properly for the first time. "That's your arrangement?" "That's the only arrangement there is." There was no self-pity in his tone, just fact. Claire nodded once, absorbing that. "And the owner?" Oliver's jaw tightened slightly. "My brother, Heath." The name hung there for a moment. carrying more weight than the single word suggested. Claire didn't push. Not yet. Instead, she opened her folder and took out her notes. "We'll begin with the main study," she said. "High probability of documented assets." Oliver hesitated, just briefly, then nodded. "Follow me." The study was locked. That alone told Claire enough. Oliver produced a key from his pocket, turning it with a quiet click. The door opened to a room frozen in time. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books that hadn't been touched in years. A large desk stood near the window, its surface covered in a thin layer of dust, undisturbed. Claire stepped inside slowly, her professional focus sharpening. "No one's been in here?" she asked. "Not really," Oliver replied. "He doesn't care about this part." Claire moved toward the desk, setting her folder down carefully. "Then we start here." Oliver stayed near the door, watching her work. Not intruding, not assisting, just present. Claire began her methodical process, documenting visible items, noting condition, estimating value ranges in her head. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the soft sound of pages turning and drawers opening. Then her hand paused. The bureau. 18th century, at least from first glance. She leaned closer, eyes narrowing slightly. "This piece," she said, almost to herself. Oliver stepped forward. "What about it?" Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she traced the edge of the wood, her fingers detecting something subtle. A misalignment. Too precise to be damage. "Help me move this," she said. Oliver frowned slightly, but complied, gripping one side as they shifted the bureau just enough to change the angle. Claire crouched, examining the base more closely now. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Focus sharpened into certainty. "There's a false bottom," she said quietly. Oliver blinked. "You're sure?" Claire glanced up at him. "Yes." A brief silence stretched between them, charged with something unspoken. Then Oliver moved closer, kneeling opposite her. "How do you open it?" Claire's lips pressed into a thin line as she studied the mechanism. Carefully, she found the hidden latch after a few seconds. Ingenious, nearly invisible. With a precise motion, she pressed and shifted. A soft click answered. The panel loosened. Neither of them spoke as Claire lifted it slowly, revealing the hollow space beneath. Inside, wrapped and sealed, lay a single cylindrical case. Oliver stared at the void in the wood, his face pale. He had spent weeks stabilizing this very bureau last autumn, focusing on the grain and the joints, never realizing that the unusual thickness of the base wasn't a stylistic choice, but a mask. He had touched this secret every day without knowing it existed. Oliver stepped closer, his eyes widening as he recognized the piece. Time seemed to narrow around it. Oliver let out a quiet breath. That wasn't on any inventory. Claire didn't look at him. "No," she said. "It wasn't." Her hand hovered over the case for a second before she finally picked it up. It was heavier than expected. Significant. Important. She knew that instinctively. Oliver's voice dropped. "What is it?" Claire's eyes met his, steady and serious. "Something that changes everything." Claire didn't open the cylindrical case immediately. She stood there for a moment, holding it with both hands, feeling its weight. Not just physical, but implied. Oliver watched her closely, the earlier caution in his posture replaced by something sharper. Anticipation. "You're not going to just leave it sealed, right?" he asked. Claire glanced at him, then back at the case. "I'm going to open it properly." She moved to the desk, clearing a small space with precise motions. No wasted movement. No hesitation now, just professional control. The seal was old but intact. Wax, aged to a deep, brittle red. She examined it briefly before breaking it cleanly. The sound was quiet, but in the stillness of the room, it carried. Oliver stepped closer without realizing it. Claire slid the cap free and carefully tilted the case, easing the contents out onto the desk. A roll of aged parchment, tied with a thin cord. She untied it slowly, flattening the sheets one by one. Silence stretched as both of them leaned in. The ink had faded slightly, but remained legible. Detailed. Precise. Architectural drawings, no, more than that. The sketches revealed hidden structural voids designed by a master architect of the 1700s, compartments intended to hide entire libraries from the tax collectors of the era. It wasn't just art, it was a blueprint for institutionalized secrecy. Original schematics. Notes in the margins. Signatures. Claire's breath slowed, her eyes moving faster now as recognition formed piece by piece. "This is impossible," she murmured. Oliver frowned. "What?" Claire looked up at him, and for the first time since arriving, there was no professional distance in her expression. Only clarity. "These are original 18th century design drafts," she said. "Not copies. Not reproductions. Originals." Oliver blinked, trying to process that. "So valuable?" Claire held his gaze. "Extremely." She tapped lightly on the margin of one sheet. "This signature alone, if authenticated, puts it in a category most private collectors would fight over." Oliver's jaw tightened slightly. "How much?" Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked back at the documents, calculating, reassessing. Then, enough to cover the estate's debts multiple times over. The words settled heavily between them. Oliver leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair. That's not possible." "It is," Claire said evenly. "And it's real." Silence followed. Not empty, charged. Oliver's eyes returned to the drawings, but now he was seeing something else entirely. Not history, not craftsmanship. A solution. "This could save the house," he said quietly. Claire's expression shifted, just slightly. "Legally, this has to be documented and registered immediately." Oliver looked at her. "And then it goes through proper evaluation. Likely auction." His jaw set. "Auction means it leaves." Claire didn't respond right away. She knew that tone. Not argument, attachment. "That's how preservation works," she said. "It ensures authenticity, protection, and value." Oliver gave a short, humorless exhale. "Protection for who?" Claire met his gaze, steady. "For the artifact. Not the building it was hidden in." That landed harder than she intended. Oliver looked away, his focus returning to the papers, but now there was tension in his posture. "You don't get it," he said. Claire didn't argue. "Then explain." He hesitated. Not because he didn't have words, but because choosing them mattered. "This house isn't just walls," he said finally. "It's the only thing left that hasn't been completely destroyed." Claire studied him for a moment, then looked back at the documents. "And this," she said quietly, "is the only thing here that can actually change that outcome." Oliver didn't answer. The logic was clear. The conflict was unavoidable. Claire began carefully re-rolling the parchments, restoring them to the case with the same precision she had used to open it. Controlled. Decisive. "I'll need to log this immediately," she said. Oliver's head snapped slightly toward her. "Already?" Claire looked at him. "There's no delay option here." "There is," he said. Claire's expression didn't change, but her tone sharpened just a fraction. "No, there isn't." A beat. Then footsteps echoed faintly from the corridor outside. Both of them froze, not dramatically, but enough to register the sound. Slow. Confident. Approaching. Oliver's posture shifted instantly, tension snapping into place. "That's him," he said under his breath. Claire straightened, the case now secured in her hands. "Your brother?" Oliver nodded once. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A pause. Then the handle turned. The door opened without hesitation. Heath Ashwood stepped in like he owned not just the room, but the moment itself. He didn't look surprised to see Claire. If anything, his expression suggested he had already calculated her presence before arriving. His gaze moved from her to Oliver, then to the desk, to the case. A faint smile formed. Not warm, not welcoming. Precise. "I was wondering when you'd find it," he said. Claire held his gaze, unreadable. Oliver didn't move. Heath took a few steps into the room, unhurried, his attention fixed on the case in Claire's hands. "That," he continued, "is a family relic." Claire's grip tightened slightly, but her voice remained level. "It's an undocumented historical artifact." Heath's smile didn't fade. Same thing. Different perspective. He stopped a few feet away, close enough now that the tension between them felt deliberate. Controlled. "You won't be registering it," he said. "Not a request." Claire met his eyes directly. "I will." Then Heath's gaze shifted to Oliver. Just for a second. But it was enough. The air in the room changed. "No," Heath said calmly. "You won't." Heath didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The certainty in it did the work for him. Claire stood still, the cylindrical case held firmly against her side, her posture straight, controlled. "You don't get to decide that," she said. Heath's smile sharpened, but his tone stayed almost conversational. "Actually, I do. This house, everything in it, it's mine." Claire didn't break eye contact. Ownership doesn't override legal obligation. A pause. Then Heath let out a quiet breath, as if mildly disappointed. You're very precise, he said. I appreciate that. He took another step closer, his attention fully on her now. But precision doesn't always survive reality. Oliver shifted slightly near the desk, tension visible in the way his shoulders tightened. He knew that tone. It meant Heath wasn't arguing. He was positioning. This item, Claire continued, must be documented. That's not optional. Heath's gaze flicked to the case again, then back to her. And if it never leaves this room? Claire didn't hesitate. Then it becomes evidence. That earned a faint, amused exhale from him. You think I'd let it escalate that far? Claire didn't respond. She didn't need to. Heath turned his head slightly toward Oliver. You've been working down here, he said casually. Fixing things. Keeping busy. Oliver didn't answer. Living here, Heath continued. Eating here. For years. Oliver's jaw tightened. Say what you want to say. Heath looked back at Claire, but his words were meant for both of them. My brother has always had a complicated relationship with responsibility. Claire's voice cut in, calm but firm. This isn't about him. Heath smiled again, softer this time. Everything here is about him. A beat. Then his tone shifted, subtly, but decisively. You'll leave the item here, he said. You'll complete your general evaluation report, excluding this discovery. Claire's expression didn't change. No, Heath held her gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. I was hoping you'd say that. He turned, walking slowly toward the window, hands resting casually behind his back. It's always more interesting when people think they have a choice. Oliver stepped forward slightly, his eyes flashing with a cold realization. Heath. Not now, Heath said without turning, unaware that Oliver's hand was already closed tightly around the recorder in his pocket, the red light glowing steadily. Silence. Then he faced them again. Let's be clear, he continued, his voice calm, measured. That item is not leaving this house. It is not being registered, and it is certainly not being sold through any official channel. Claire's grip on the case remained steady. Then you're planning to sell it unofficially. Heath didn't deny it. I'm planning to solve a problem. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. By creating several more. Heath tilted his head. Only if someone insists on making it complicated. The implication hung in the air. Claire didn't move. I'm logging it, she said. Today. Heath watched her for a long second. Then he smiled again. But this time, there was no warmth in it at all. No, he said quietly. You're not. He stepped closer again, stopping just within her personal space. Not touching, but close enough to make the boundary intentional. Because if you do, he added, everything changes. For you. Claire didn't step back. That sounds like a threat. Heath's expression didn't shift. It's a statement of consequence. A pause. Then Claire spoke, her tone precise. You're underestimating how this works. Heath shook his head slightly. No, he said. You're overestimating how much protection it gives you. Silence. Tension held, stretched thin but unbroken. Then Heath stepped back, just enough to release the pressure. Take the day, he said. Finish your visible work. Think carefully about what you choose to include. Claire didn't respond. Heath's gaze shifted once more to Oliver. And you, he added, voice lighter now, should remember where you are. Oliver didn't answer. He didn't look away either. That, in itself, was new. Heath noticed. Of course he did. A flicker of something passed through his expression. Interest, maybe. Or calculation. Then it was gone. We'll talk again tonight, he said, already turning toward the door. He paused just before leaving, glancing back once more at the case in Claire's hands. Don't misplace it. The door closed behind him with a quiet, final click. Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Oliver let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He's not bluffing, he said. Claire nodded slightly. I know. She set the case back on the desk, not relinquishing it, but grounding the moment. Then you also know he won't let you leave with it. Claire looked at him. He doesn't have to let me. Oliver frowned. Claire, I'm not negotiating legality with him, she said, calm, firm. That's not how this works. Oliver ran a hand through his hair again, pacing once across the room before stopping. You don't understand him. Claire's gaze stayed steady. Then help me. That stopped him. Not because he didn't want to, but because he did. Before Claire could speak again, Oliver reached into a drawer beneath his workbench and pulled out a digital recorder. His hands were steady, but his voice had gained a hard, sudden edge. "I've been keeping this for months," he whispered. "Every threat, every illegal deal he discussed in here when he thought I wasn't listening. I was too afraid to use it alone, but I won't let him erase you too." He didn't wait for her approval. He checked the storage and placed it carefully among the tools on the desk, hidden in plain sight. "If he decides to push this," Oliver said slowly, "he won't do it directly. He'll make it look like you created the problem." Claire absorbed that. "Meaning?" Oliver met her eyes. "Meaning you won't see it coming until it's already happened." A pause. Claire nodded once. "Then we don't wait." Oliver's expression tightened. "We?" Claire held his gaze. "You said this could save the house." Oliver didn't answer immediately. The conflict was there, clear, unresolved. Claire didn't push further. Instead, she picked up her folder again, her movements controlled, deliberate. "I'll finish the visible inventory," she said. "But this," she glanced at the case, "doesn't disappear." Oliver watched her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Not agreement. Not yet. But not refusal either. And that was enough for now. The workshop felt different that evening. Not quieter, more contained. As if the walls themselves held the tension from earlier and refused to let it dissipate. Claire sat at the long wooden table, her notes spread in precise alignment, pen moving steadily across the page. She worked through the inventory without pause, each item documented, each detail checked. Control through structure. It was the only way to keep the rest from bleeding in. Oliver stood across the room, focused on a partially restored chair. Sandpaper moved in slow, even strokes along the wood, the rhythm deliberate. Not efficient, measured. He wasn't just working. He was thinking. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The silence wasn't empty. It was occupied by everything they hadn't said yet. Claire finished a line in her notes and set the pen down briefly, her gaze shifting toward him. "You've been doing this alone?" Oliver didn't look up. "Mostly." "For how long?" A pause. The sandpaper stopped. "A few years." Claire studied him. "And he just lets you?" Oliver let out a quiet breath, setting the tool aside. "He doesn't let anything," he said. "He ignores what doesn't interest him." Claire nodded once. "Until it does." That made Oliver glance at her. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly." Silence settled again, but lighter this time. Not pressure, acknowledgement. Claire leaned back slightly in her chair. "Your work is precise," she said. Oliver frowned faintly, caught off guard by the shift. "It has to be." "No," Claire replied. "It doesn't. Not at this level." He held her gaze for a second, uncertain whether it was a critique or something else. "You mean it's too slow?" Claire shook her head. "I mean it's intentional." A small pause. Then, "That matters." Oliver looked away, but the tension in his shoulders shifted, less defensive now, more unsettled in a different way. "No one said that before," he admitted quietly. Claire didn't respond immediately. She reached for one of the smaller tools on the table, turning it slightly in her fingers, examining its balance. "They should have," she said. Oliver watched her now more directly. "Why?" Claire placed the tool back exactly where it had been. "Because it's the difference between someone doing a job and someone building something that lasts." That landed. Oliver didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "Doesn't matter if there's nothing left to keep." Claire met his eyes. "It does if you plan to leave." A beat. Oliver shook his head slightly. "That's not how this works." Claire tilted her head. "Then how does it work?" He hesitated. Not because he didn't know, but because saying it out loud made it real. "You stay," he said finally. "You make it work with what you have. That's it." Claire's expression didn't change. "That's not a plan. That's survival." Oliver let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. "Same thing most of the time." Claire leaned forward slightly, resting her forearms on the table. "Not if you want it to change." He looked at her again, something sharper in his gaze now. "And what? Leave everything." Claire didn't hesitate. "If everything is what's holding you in place, yes." Silence followed. Not tense this time. Just heavy with possibility neither of them had fully considered before. Oliver looked down at his hands, at the fine layer of dust still clinging to his fingers. "You talk like it's simple," he said. Claire's voice stayed calm. "It's not simple. It's just clear." A long pause. Then Oliver nodded slightly, more to himself than to her. "You really believe that?" "I do." The honesty in it didn't feel forced. That was what made it land. Another stretch of quiet passed, but now it felt different. Less like avoidance, more like space. Oliver moved back to the chair, but his movements had changed less. Mechanical, more intentional. Claire returned to her notes, but her focus wasn't as rigid now. The edges had softened. Time passed. The light outside shifted, fading into the muted tones of evening. At some point, Oliver set the chair aside completely and crossed the room, stopping near the table. "What would you do?" he asked. Claire looked up. "With what?" "If it was yours," he said. "The house. The situation." Claire considered that for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the intricate work Oliver had performed on the furniture. Not rushing it. "I'd separate the problem from the attachment," she said. Oliver frowned slightly. "Meaning?" "Meaning I wouldn't try to save everything," she replied. "Just what actually matters." He held her gaze. "And how do you decide that?" Claire's expression remained steady. "You already know." That hit closer than he expected. He looked away first. Silence followed again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding. Oliver exhaled slowly. "You make it sound like there's a way out." Claire's voice softened, just slightly. "There usually is." He nodded once, though uncertainty still lingered. "And you?" he asked after a moment. "What's your way out?" Claire didn't answer immediately. Her gaze dropped briefly to her notes, then returned to him. "Doing my job correctly," she said. Oliver studied her. "Even if it costs you?" Claire didn't look away. Especially then. That settled something between them. Not agreement. Not resolution. But understanding. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken twice. Outside, the last of the daylight faded. The workshop lights cast a warmer glow now, narrowing the world down to this room, this table, this conversation. Oliver leaned back slightly against the edge of the table, arms crossing loosely. "You really think that fine changes everything?" he asked. Claire didn't hesitate. "It already has." Oliver glanced toward the door, as if expecting it to open again. It didn't. But the expectation remained. "He won't let it go," he said. Claire followed his gaze briefly, then looked back at him. "He doesn't have to." Oliver frowned. "That's the second time you've said that." Claire's expression was calm, but there was something firmer underneath now. "Because it's true." A pause. Then she added, "Control only works if everyone agrees to it." Oliver let that sit. Slowly, something in his posture shifted. Not fully, just enough to register. "You don't agree," he said. Claire met his eyes. No, another silence. But this one felt different from all the others. Not heavy, not tense. Clear. Oliver nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Good," he said quietly. Claire didn't respond, but she didn't need to. The connection had shifted. Not defined, not declared, but present. And for the first time since she arrived, the house didn't feel entirely closed in. Not because anything had changed, but because now there was someone else inside it who saw it the same way she did. Heath didn't come to the workshop immediately. That, in itself, was deliberate. The house stayed quiet through the evening, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that meant absence. It was the kind that meant observation. Claire finished her notes without interruption, closing the folder with a precise motion. Oliver had returned to work, but the earlier rhythm was gone. His movements were sharper now, less about restoration, more about control. "The buyer is already on his way. We have very little time left," Heath said as he stepped inside, the ticking of his watch audible in the quiet room. "The network is already in motion." He stepped inside as if he had all the time in the world. His gaze moved across the room, taking in the arrangement, the distance between them, the tools, the table. "Measuring. Productive day?" he asked lightly. Claire didn't answer. Oliver didn't stop what he was doing, but the pressure in his grip on the tool tightened. Heath smiled faintly. "I'll take that as a yes." He walked further in, stopping near the table where Claire's notes had been. "I assume you've completed your preliminary evaluation." Claire met his eyes. "The visible one." A small pause. Heath nodded, as if acknowledging the wording. "Of course." He rested his fingertips lightly on the edge of the table, casual, controlled. "And the other matter?" Claire's expression remained neutral. "Still under review." Heath's gaze held hers for a second longer than necessary. Then he smiled again, but softer this time. "Good," he said. "That means we can discuss it properly." Oliver finally set his tool down, turning slightly toward them. "There's nothing to discuss," he said. Heath didn't even look at him at first. "There's always something to discuss," he replied. Then his attention shifted, direct, deliberate. "You, for example." Oliver's jaw tightened. "Leave me out of it." Heath tilted his head slightly. That's not how this works. Claire stepped in before the tension could snap. If you have a proposal, state it. Heath looked back at her, interest flickering briefly. Straight to the point, he said. I respect that. He moved a step closer, lowering his voice just enough to narrow the moment. The item stays here. No registration. No official channels. Claire didn't react. In return, he continued, you receive a percentage of the private sale. Silence. Oliver's head turned sharply toward Claire. She didn't look at him. No, she said. Immediate. Unambiguous. Heath didn't flinch. You didn't even ask how much. Claire's gaze stayed fixed on him. It doesn't matter. A brief pause. Then Heath's smile thinned, just slightly. It should. He straightened, tone still calm, but something underneath it hardened. We're not talking about a minor sum. This is life-changing money. Claire's voice didn't shift. For you. Heath let out a quiet breath, as if recalibrating. For anyone involved. Oliver stepped forward now, tension fully visible. She said no. Heath glanced at him, finally giving him full attention. I heard her. A beat. Then, more quietly. Did you? That landed exactly where it was meant to. Oliver's expression flickered, just for a second. Doubt. Conflict. Heath saw it. Of course he did. He turned back to Claire. You're making a principled decision, he said. That's admirable. A pause. But impractical. Claire didn't respond. Heath took another step closer, not aggressive, but intentional. Let me simplify it, he said. You walk away with more than you'd earn in years. Quietly. Cleanly. Claire's eyes didn't leave his. Illegal. Heath's smile returned, faint and controlled. Untraceable. Temporary, Claire replied. Everything like that is. That earned a brief, sharper look from him. Then it was gone. You're very certain of your position, he said. Claire nodded once. I am. Silence stretched. Then Heath shifted his attention again, to Oliver. This time, slower. Calculated. And you? He asked. Oliver didn't answer immediately. His gaze moved briefly to Claire, then back to Heath. The hesitation was small, but visible. It's not my decision, he said finally. Heath's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. That's where you're wrong, he said quietly. Oliver's jaw tightened. I'm not doing this. Heath stepped closer to him now, the space between them narrowing. You already are. A pause. Then, softer, you've been here for years. Living off what's left of this place. Oliver didn't move. That doesn't mean I owe you this. Heath's voice stayed calm. It means you owe the house. Claire watched the exchange carefully, not interrupting. The shift was clear now. This wasn't just about the item. It was about leverage. This, Heath continued, gesturing vaguely toward the study beyond the walls, is the only thing that can keep it from collapsing completely. Oliver's eyes flickered again. Conflict, sharper now. Real. Heath pressed it. Or we let it go through official channels, he added lightly. Watch it get sold off piece by piece. Strangers taking what's left. Claire stepped in, her voice cutting clean through the tension. That's not how preservation works. Heath looked at her without turning his head. That's exactly how it works. A beat. Then he faced her fully again. You're offering a system, he said. I'm offering control. Claire didn't hesitate. You're offering risk. Heath smiled faintly. Only if someone makes it one. Silence. Then Claire spoke, steady and precise. You're asking me to falsify an official evaluation and participate in an illegal transaction. Heath didn't deny it. I'm asking you to be flexible. No, she said. Final. That word landed harder than any argument. Heath held her gaze for a long second. Then he nodded once, slowly. All right, he said. We move to the next option. Oliver's posture stiffened immediately. Heath. Not yet. Heath cut in, still calm. He looked back at Claire, expression composed. You'll reconsider, he said. Not a question. Claire didn't respond. Heath turned toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. Because if you don't, he added, almost casually, the situation becomes significantly less negotiable. He opened the door, then stopped, glancing back once more. And that tends to complicate things for everyone involved. The door closed behind him. Silence followed. But this time, it was heavier than before. Oliver exhaled sharply, running both hands through his hair. That wasn't a suggestion, he said. Claire nodded. I know. He turned to her, frustration clear now. You don't understand how far he'll go. Claire met his gaze. Then tell me. Oliver hesitated. Just for a second. Then, far enough that saying no isn't the end of it. Claire didn't look away. It never is. That answer didn't calm him. If anything, it made the situation more real. Oliver paced once across the room, then stopped. "He's not done," he said. Claire's voice stayed steady. "Neither am I." Silence. Then Oliver looked at her again, really looked this time. "You're not going to back down." Claire shook her head once. No, a long pause. Then Oliver nodded slowly. "Not agreement. Not yet. But closer than before." "Then we're in trouble," he said quietly. Claire didn't deny it. "Yes," she said. And for the first time, the weight of that truth didn't push them apart. It held them in the same place. The shift came the next morning, and it was subtle enough that Claire didn't notice it immediately. That was the point. The house looked the same. The corridors unchanged. The workshop untouched. But something in the atmosphere had tightened, like a system quietly resetting around a new variable. Claire moved through her routine without deviation. Notes reviewed. Inventory cross-checked. The cylindrical case remained secured, not hidden, but never out of reach. Control through visibility. Oliver was already in the workshop when she arrived, but he wasn't working. That alone was enough to register. He stood near the table, arms crossed, eyes fixed on something that wasn't there. "Something happened," Claire said, not a question. Oliver looked up. There was hesitation in his expression, brief, but real. "He's moving faster," he said. Claire stepped closer. "How?" Oliver exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet." That answer didn't satisfy her, but it told her enough. "Then we assume escalation," she said. Oliver gave a small, humorless nod. "That's usually how it goes." Silence settled, but it didn't last long. A sound interrupted it. Footsteps again, but different this time. Not measured. Intentional. Heath didn't wait. The door opened sharply, and he stepped in without pause. There was no smile now. No casual tone. Just focus. "We're done negotiating," he said. Claire didn't move. There was no negotiation. Heath's gaze locked onto hers. There was an opportunity. A beat. "You declined." Oliver stepped slightly forward. "Heath, stay out of this." Heath cut in, sharper than before. Oliver didn't back off, but he didn't push either. Claire held her position. "What do you want?" Heath reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. No rush. No theatrics. Just a controlled motion. He tapped the screen once, then turned it toward her. "I want clarity." Claire looked at the screen. For a fraction of a second, nothing registered. Then it did. The image was sharp, clear, undeniable. Her bag, open. Her hand, mid-motion. An antique object partially visible inside. Beside the object lay a stack of cash and a forged ledger with her signature already expertly mimicked. It wasn't just a photo of her holding the item. It was a photo of a completed, illicit transaction. The angle was perfect. Intentional. Manufactured. Claire's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Precision replaced by calculation. "That's fabricated," she said. Heath's tone remained calm. "It's documented." Oliver stepped closer now, eyes narrowing as he looked at the screen. "What is this?" Heath didn't look at him. "Evidence." Claire's voice stayed level. "Of something that didn't happen." Heath lowered the phone slightly, but didn't put it away. "That's not how it will be interpreted." Silence. Then Claire spoke again, more precise now. "You planted it." Heath's expression didn't shift. "Prove it." That landed exactly as intended. Oliver looked between them, tension snapping into something sharper. "You set her up?" he said, disbelief cutting through the words. Heath finally glanced at him. "I created an option." Oliver's jaw tightened. "That's not an option." Heath's gaze returned to Claire. "It is now." A pause. Then he continued, voice even, controlled. "You help me complete the sale. Quietly. Efficiently. And this disappears." Claire didn't respond. Heath's tone didn't change, but the weight behind it did. "Or," he added, "I make a call." Oliver stepped forward fully now. "You're not calling anyone." Heath didn't even acknowledge him. "The police arrive," he continued, eyes fixed on Claire. "They find what's already been documented. The narrative writes itself." Claire held his gaze. No panic. No visible reaction. But her mind was moving faster now. Mapping outcomes. Calculating risk. "You're assuming I won't fight it," she said. Heath nodded slightly. "You will. A beat. You'll lose." Silence filled the room, thick and immediate. Oliver looked at Claire now, searching for something, certainty, direction, anything. "This ends your license," Heath continued calmly. "Your career. Possibly more. Claire's voice remained steady. And if I agree? Heath's answer came without hesitation. It never happened. The photo is deleted, the files are wiped, and you walk away with a commission that dwarfs your annual salary. A pause. Then, softer. You walk away clean. Claire didn't look away. And you get what you want. Heath gave a faint nod. Yes. Oliver shook his head, stepping back slightly, as if the space itself had shifted under him. This is insane, he muttered. Claire didn't respond to him. Her focus stayed on Heath. When? She asked. Heath's expression sharpened slightly. Interest, not surprise. Tonight, he said. The buyer arrives after dark. Claire nodded once. Small. Controlled. And the item? Stays secured until then, Heath replied. You'll prepare the necessary documentation to make the transfer untraceable. Claire didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, long enough to matter. Then, I need time. Heath studied her for a second, then nodded. You have a few hours. He turned toward the door, then paused, looking back at her once more. Don't try anything, he said. Not a threat this time. A statement. Claire didn't respond. Heath left. The door closed. Silence didn't return gradually. It dropped, heavy and immediate. Oliver turned to her, tension fully visible now. You're not actually considering this. Claire didn't answer right away. She looked at the table, at her notes, at the tools, then back at him. I don't have a clean option, she said. Oliver shook his head. There has to be something. Claire met his eyes. Then say it. He hesitated. The conflict was no longer subtle. It was exposed, raw. If you don't do it, he said slowly, he destroys you. Claire nodded. Yes. And if you do, Oliver continued, you become part of it. Claire didn't deny it. Yes. Silence. Then Oliver stepped closer, lowering his voice. Oliver stepped closer, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. If you help him, you'll never be clean again. He doesn't just want the money, Claire. He wants to own your silence. Claire's expression didn't change, but something in her gaze cooled. And you? She asked. Oliver froze for a second. What about me? Claire held his eyes. You're asking me to compromise everything to protect myself. A pause. Where do you stand? Oliver didn't answer immediately. That was enough. Claire nodded once. Small. Final. I see, she said quietly. The distance between them didn't increase physically, but it shifted in every other way. Claire turned away, picking up her folder, her movements precise again. Controlled. Oliver took a step forward. Claire, she didn't stop. I need to think, she said. Flat. Closed. And for the first time since they met, she wasn't including him in that process. The hours passed without clarity. Only pressure. Claire stayed in the workshop alone for most of it, the cylindrical case on the table in front of her like a fixed point in a shifting system. She didn't open it. She didn't move it. She simply measured everything around it against what it represented now. Not value, but leverage. Outside, the house felt quieter again, but not calm. Controlled silence. The kind that meant decisions were being made elsewhere. Oliver returned once, then left again without speaking. That alone told her enough. He was no longer choosing a side easily. He was being pulled between them. When he came back a second time, it was different. He didn't stop at the doorway. He walked in. You're really doing it, he said. Claire didn't look up immediately. I haven't agreed yet. Oliver let out a short, humorless breath. But you're not saying no. That was accurate. She didn't correct him. Instead, she closed her folder slowly. He has evidence, she said. Oliver shook his head. He created it. It still exists, Claire replied. Silence. Oliver crossed the room, stopping near the table but not touching it. So what? You just give him what he wants. Claire finally looked at him. I evaluate options, she said. That's my job. Oliver's expression tightened. That's not an answer. Claire didn't deny it. It's the only one I have right now. A pause stretched between them. Not hostile, but fractured. Oliver lowered his voice. You said this place changes things, he said. That I should see beyond survival. Claire held his gaze. I did. Then what changed, he asked. Claire didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter. Reality. That landed hard. Oliver looked away for a moment, running a hand through his hair. He's going to ruin you, he said. Claire nodded once. If I do nothing. Oliver looked back at her quickly. And if you help him? Claire didn't answer right away. The silence stretched until it became its own statement. Then she said, Then I control the damage. Oliver stepped closer. That's not control. That's surrender with conditions. Claire's expression tightened slightly. It's survival with limits. That distinction hung in the air between them. Oliver exhaled slowly, frustration mixing with something heavier. You're not like this, he said quietly. Claire blinked once. Like what? Detached, he said, calculating everything like it's already lost. That hit closer than anything else had. For a fraction of a second, her composure faltered, not outwardly, but internally. Then it returned. Sharper. I'm being precise, she said. Oliver shook his head. No, you're backing away. Silence. Claire didn't deny it. That was worse. Oliver stepped back slightly, as if the distance itself clarified something. So that's it, he said. You just let him win. Claire's voice stayed level. There is no winning here. That stopped him. There's always a choice, he said. Claire met his eyes. Then make it. The words were simple. Final. Oliver stared at her, searching for something, certainty, alignment, anything that resembled the person who had walked into this house and treated it like something that could be fixed. If you go through with this, he said slowly, you're not just protecting yourself. You're validating him. Claire didn't respond. That silence confirmed it more than words could. Oliver nodded once, as if accepting something he didn't want to. And if I stop you? He asked. Claire looked at him. Then you lose everything here. That was the truth. Neither softened it. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but in possibility. Oliver stepped closer again, voice lower. I don't want to be part of his world, he said. Claire held his gaze. Then don't be. A pause. But understand the cost. Oliver's gaze snapped from the case to Claire, his jaw setting with a sudden, sharp finality. He thinks the walls of this house will keep his secrets, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous edge. But I'm the one who knows where the foundations are rotting. If you're going to burn it down, Claire, I'll provide the fuel. He reached into his workbench, retrieving the digital recorder he had shown her earlier. Everything is on here. The shell companies, the private buyers, the threats. I'm calling the authorities. He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows of the workshop's far corner, his hand white-knuckled around the recorder. He wasn't just calling the authorities. He was waiting to capture the final confession. Claire didn't respond. He left. The door closed. And for the first time since she arrived at Ashwood, Claire didn't immediately return to work. She stayed still, looking at the case. Not as an artifact, not as evidence, but as the point where everything had stopped being separate and started becoming irreversible. Night arrived without ceremony. No change in the house, no visible shift. Only the absence of daylight made everything feel closer, more compressed. Claire stood in the workshop with the lights dimmed, the cylindrical case still on the table, untouched. Oliver was not there yet. That absence mattered. It meant he was either preparing for what was coming or avoiding the moment entirely. Claire didn't correct either assumption. Footsteps came before the door opened. This time, slower. Measured again. Heath entered like he had already confirmed the outcome of the evening. Behind him, two men in plain clothing followed, silent, observant, professional in the way that didn't need explanation. Claire's gaze shifted immediately to them, then back to Heath. You brought witnesses, she said. Heath didn't react. You brought uncertainty, he replied. Oliver entered a moment later, stopping just inside the doorway. His eyes moved between Claire, Heath, and the men. He didn't speak. Not yet. Heath stepped further into the room, stopping near the table. We proceed, he said simply. Claire didn't move. Not until we confirm terms. Heath tilted his head slightly. Terms haven't changed. Claire's voice stayed steady. They have if coercion is involved. One of the men behind Heath shifted slightly. Claire noticed. Heath did too, but he ignored it. The item is under my professional jurisdiction now, Heath, Claire added, her voice dropping an octave. You're negotiating for property that is already logged into a system you cannot reach. There is no coercion, he said calmly, though his eyes darted to the case still gripped in her hand. Claire looked at him. You fabricated evidence against me. A faint pause. Then Heath replied, I documented risk. Oliver's voice broke in, sharp. You planted it. All eyes shifted to him. For a moment, he seemed like he might step forward, but didn't. Heath finally looked directly at his brother. You're emotional, he said. Oliver's jaw tightened. No, I'm done pretending this is normal. Silence followed. Claire didn't interrupt. She was watching the structure now, not just the people. This wasn't negotiation anymore. It was positioning. Heath turned back to her. "We don't have time for philosophical debate," he said. "The buyer arrives in minutes." Claire nodded slightly. "Then we need legal closure." Heath's expression didn't change. "We already agreed. No official record." Claire held his gaze. "Then I don't proceed." The room tightened instantly. Not loudly, but sharply. One of the men behind Heath shifted again, more noticeable this time. Oliver stepped forward. "Good," he said quietly. Heath didn't look at him. His focus remained on Claire. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. Claire replied evenly. "You made it impossible when you introduced falsified evidence." A pause. Then Heath exhaled slowly, as if deciding something. "Fine," he said. "We adjust." Claire didn't react. Heath gestured slightly to one of the men. The man stepped forward, placing a small recorder on the table. "You will state," Heath said, "that the item was voluntarily relinquished for private transfer under estate discretion." Claire looked at the recorder, then at him. "That's not legally valid." Heath's tone stayed calm. "It doesn't need to be." Oliver's voice sharpened again. "This is still fraud." Heath finally looked at him. "This is resolution." Claire reached forward, not for the recorder, but for the cylindrical case. The movement was slow, deliberate. Every eye in the room tracked it. She placed her hand on it, then stopped. "There's another option," she said. Heath's gaze narrowed slightly. "There isn't." Claire didn't look at him. She looked at Oliver. That shift changed the room. "If I log this now," she said, "officially, it becomes evidence of concealment and attempted illegal transfer." Oliver understood instantly. His expression tightened. Heath didn't move, but something in his eyes sharpened. Claire continued, steady. "Which means the entire estate enters investigation protocol." Silence. Then Heath spoke quietly. "You wouldn't." Claire met his eyes now. "I already told you," she said. "I don't negotiate legality." The silence that followed was absolute. One of the men behind Heath stepped back slightly. Oliver didn't move at all. He was watching Claire now like she had just crossed a line he didn't expect her to reach. Heath's voice lowered. "That destroys the house." Claire nodded once. "Yes." A beat. "And protects everything else." Oliver finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Including you." Claire didn't deny it. That was the turning point. Heath stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Oliver. And something in his expression changed. Not anger, not frustration. Calculation, losing control. "You chose her," Heath said quietly. Oliver didn't answer immediately. Then, "No," he said. "I chose reality." That was enough. Heath stepped back slightly. The men behind him shifted again. The structure had collapsed, but not exploded. It was fragmenting. Claire moved her hand off the case. "It's over," she said. Not to Heath. Not to Oliver. To the situation itself. Heath gave a short, almost silent exhale. "This will ruin all of us," he said. Claire nodded. "Yes." A pause. Then she added, "But not equally." That landed last. Oliver looked at her, then at Heath. The imbalance was now visible, unavoidable. Heath stepped closer, his shadow falling over the desk, his voice a low, jagged rasp. "You think a badge or a protocol protects you here? I've spent years building a network that keeps this house invisible. I can make you disappear before the first squad car hits the gravel." Claire didn't flinch. She simply turned her phone screen toward him. "The audio from this room is being streamed to a secure off-site server," Claire said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous edge. "If the signal cuts out, the file is automatically forwarded to the authorities. You're not fighting me anymore, Heath. You're fighting a system." Heath stared at the screen, the veins in his temple throbbing. He backed away, his face contorting into a mask of cold, impotent fury. "We're leaving," he spat, and the room emptied as if the air had been sucked out of it. When the door closed, only 3 of them remained. Claire, Oliver, the case, and the aftermath of a decision that couldn't be undone. Oliver finally spoke. "You just ended it." Claire nodded once. "Yes." He stared at her for a long moment. "You also burned it." Claire met his gaze. "Yes." Silence stretched between them again, but it was no longer uncertain. It was final in a different way. Oliver exhaled slowly. "So what now?" Claire looked at the case, then at the empty space where Heath had stood. "Now," she said, "we deal with what's left." The morning arrived not with sunlight, but with the cold flash of blue and red against the gravel. The system had finally reached Ashwood, and it was moving with a mechanical, indifferent precision that even Heath couldn't manipulate. The house was no longer being treated as property, nor as heritage, nor as a home. It was being treated as evidence. Inside the building, the transformation was even more pronounced. Doors that had been closed for years were now open. Drawers were pulled out and inspected. Rooms were being catalogued, not explored. The study, the workshop, the corridors connecting them, all of it was being translated into administrative structure. The estate itself was dissolving into records. Oliver stayed slightly behind Claire as they moved through the interior. His attention kept shifting between details that once meant familiarity and now meant nothing beyond process. The same furniture, the same architecture, the same dust, but redefined entirely by external authority. "So this is it?" Oliver asked after a long moment, his voice quieter than before, as if speaking too loudly would make the change more permanent than it already was. Claire did not answer immediately. She observed the movement of officers, the systematic way they handled the space, the way the house no longer resisted interpretation. "This is the outcome," she said finally. Oliver's expression tightened slightly, not in anger, but in recognition of finality. "He's gone," he said. Claire nodded once. "Yes." There was no emphasis placed on the word, no emotional reinforcement, just fact. A short time later, Heath was brought out from inside the estate under supervision. The movement was controlled and procedural. There was no visible resistance, no struggle, no confrontation. It was removal in its purest form, structured, documented, finalized. When Heath's eyes landed on Claire, he stopped for only a moment, a brief interruption in forward motion, as if acknowledging the center point of the entire sequence that had led here. "You chose this," he said. His voice carried no panic, only recognition. Claire met his gaze directly. "You forced the conditions that made this necessary," she replied. Heath held her eyes for a moment longer. There was no immediate response. Instead, a subtle shift in his expression suggested calculation had reached its limit. "Conditions don't destroy places," he said quietly. "People do." Claire did not respond. Oliver looked away at that moment, not because he disagreed, but because the statement forced alignment between multiple truths that could not exist comfortably together. Heath was guided forward again. The movement resumed, final and uninterrupted. The vehicles were already prepared. Doors were already open. The system did not pause for sentiment. It only completed process. As Heath was placed into the vehicle, the estate behind him remained active but no longer owned, no longer directed by internal will. It had become fully externalized, controlled, recorded, concluded at the level of authority rather than emotion. Oliver exhaled slowly, watching the final movement of the situation unfold. "It's really over," he said, almost as if testing whether the words still had meaning in this new structure. Claire remained still for a moment longer, observing the final stage of removal, the transition from conflict to procedure. "Yes," she said finally. The vehicle doors closed. The sound was final but not dramatic. There was no collapse, no aftermath explosion of meaning, only completion. The estate remained behind, no longer belonging to anyone in the way it once did. It belonged now to process, to investigation, to separation of value from ownership, to the slow dismantling of what had once been control. And in that space, nothing resisted anymore. Not the house, not the system, not the people who had been inside it. Only consequence remained, structured and irreversible. The estate did not feel the same even after the police vehicles left their visible positions. What remained was not absence of action, but residue of it. The kind of stillness that follows a completed operation, when everything has already been classified, separated, and assigned meaning by forces outside the people who once lived inside it. Claire stood in the workshop alone for a long time before she spoke or moved. The space no longer belonged to urgency. It belonged to aftermath. Tools were still arranged on the table. Dust still settled in familiar places. The unfinished chair Oliver had been working on remained exactly where it had been left, as if time had simply decided to stop interacting with it. Nothing in the room was physically changed, but everything had lost its original function in relation to the house itself. Oliver entered later than expected. His footsteps were slower than before, not hesitant, but weighted by absence of direction rather than fear. He stopped near the doorway before stepping fully inside, as if confirming that the room still accepted him in its current state. Claire did not turn immediately. "It's finished," Oliver said quietly. Claire nodded once. "The process is finished." Oliver gave a short exhale that almost resembled a laugh, but carried none of its relief. "That's a strange way to say it." Claire finally looked at him. "It's the accurate way." A pause followed. Not tension this time, but exhaustion without collapse. Oliver stepped further into the room. "They took everything," he said. Claire corrected him immediately, without emotion. "They separated everything." Oliver shook his head slightly. "That sounds like the same thing." Claire did not argue. "It isn't." Silence settled again. This time it was not filled with anticipation or conflict. It was filled with completion that neither of them fully knew how to interpret yet. Oliver looked around the workshop slowly, taking in each object not as part of a functioning space, but as remnants of something that had already been reclassified by external authority. "So what happens now?" he asked. Claire did not answer immediately. She looked at the table where the cylindrical case had once been central to everything. It was no longer there. It had been logged, secured, removed into procedural custody during the final phase of the operation. Its absence was now part of the structure rather than a missing piece. "Now," Claire said finally, "there is no leverage left." Oliver frowned slightly. "That's not an answer." Claire's voice remained steady. "It is. It just isn't the one you expected." A longer silence followed. Oliver moved toward the chair he had been restoring, running his hand lightly over the unfinished wood. "He was right about one thing," he said quietly. Claire looked at him. "About what?" Oliver hesitated before answering. "That nothing here survives without control." Claire considered that for a moment. "He confused control with ownership," she said. Oliver looked up. "Is there a difference?" Claire nodded once. "Control is temporary. Ownership only exists until it is challenged." Oliver absorbed that without responding immediately. The workshop felt larger now, not physically, but structurally, like the absence of conflict had removed invisible boundaries that once defined every movement inside it. Oliver finally spoke again. "Are you leaving?" Claire did not answer right away. The question was not procedural. It was personal, but not emotional in a simple way. It was about direction after collapse. "Yes," she said eventually. Oliver nodded slowly, as if he had already expected that answer but needed it confirmed anyway. "And me?" he asked. Claire looked at him for a long moment. "You were never part of what this became," she said. Oliver didn't respond immediately. That statement did not feel like rejection. It felt like separation of timelines. Two systems that had overlapped temporarily but were never designed to remain connected. He accepted that quietly, without resistance. "Then it's really done," he said. Claire nodded once. "Yes." There was no further argument, no additional clarification needed. The invisible contract that had bound them to the house was shredded. They were no longer two people united by a secret. They were individuals returning to separate lives, stripped of the estate's heavy shadow. Oliver turned toward the door, but paused before leaving. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "this place felt real because of you too." Claire did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice was calm, without reinforcement or contradiction. "Reality is what survives the fire," Claire said. Oliver looked at the house one last time, nodded, and walked toward the gates. He didn't look back, and neither did she. As Oliver reached the iron gates, he stopped for the first time. He didn't look back at the house, but at his hands, clean of the workshop's dust for the first time in years. He stepped over the threshold of the estate, and the heavy thud of the gate closing behind him sounded less like a conclusion and more like a release. Claire remained in the workshop alone. The silence now was different from every version of silence that had existed before in this house. It was not tension, not anticipation, not even aftermath in the active sense. It was completion without continuation. She looked around once more, not evaluating, not documenting, not analyzing. Then she picked up her folder from the table, closed it, and walked out of Ashwood Estate without looking back.